doing another interview this morning. This time it is with Dr. Duncan Cross, who is the Head of Education at the University of Bolton. And he is the first person at the University of Bolton to become the first National Teaching Fellow. And I'd really like you to explain to me what that is, please.
Okay, it's an interesting start, the National Teaching Fellow. So the National Teaching Fellowship is a national competition across the UK. Well, across the UK. It starts off with England and now it is across the entire UK, where universities can put forward 3 candidates for their excellence in teaching and learning. So there's usually a couple of 100 applications, and there's usually about 55 people that are selected on an annual basis. And I was very, very fortunate to win one in 2019. It's a fairly rigorous process. I've been an assessor on it as well, and I had some fantastic mentors within there as well. So I'll give a shout out to Professor Sally Brown, who was an amazing mentor for that, and her husband, Professor Phil Race. Usually it's the other way around, where they talk about the male's wife, but actually we'll go with it's Sally's husband, Phil Race. She might get a kick out of that, I think.
But she's first.
Yeah.
So what is the process for that? You said it's quite a rigorous process. How does that happen?
So usually you would put together a written application, and what you have to talk about is your impact, value and reach of what your work has been over a sustained period of time. And you look at your own excellence, developing excellence in terms of promoting the profession, what you might have done within the classroom, and also what you've been doing with your CPD and how you've been linking that into your teaching and learning and what the impact has been. It's a really interesting process because it's very reflective. It really makes you think about what you've done and why you've done it, but also looking at what you have done. So very often we work in a very collaborative nature, and I think teaching is very collaborative. But it really does make you think about what is it that I've contributed to things and what is it that I've done. I found it quite uncomfortable because I do tend to work very collaboratively with colleagues. A lot of my writing in kind of research is collaborative. I don't like writing on my own. I prefer to work in that collaborative space because I think it tends to be better. I think you tend to get better ideas and a wider thinking. So that's how I got into it. But yeah, it was Sally kind of took me through that process and really made me think about what the things that I'd done and what I'd contributed. And it was an amazing process to go through. And for me, it was a process I didn't expect to get anywhere. I was quite interested to just go through the process because it's quite reflective, or put it in just because I want some feedback. And then was quite surprised that I got it, which was amazing, really. So
why were you surprised?
I think there's, I suppose this links into this whole idea of the educational journey and thinking about confidence and imposter syndrome. And I'm also a principal fellow of the Higher Education Academy as well. So this is about professional recognition about what you do in your role. So there's associate fellow, senior fellow, and principal fellow. They look at your sphere of influence and what you do. So principal fellow is about the strategic influence that you have within teaching and learning. And I wrote an article about this, talking about crisis of confidence. And I also put in there that most people would think that that's not true because I'm quite gobby in a colloquial sense, in that I'll put my head above the parapet and I'll say things. So people would think that I wouldn't have that crisis of confidence, but actually you do feel like a bit of an imposter sometimes, even when you're saying things out, because you get a sense that you should say something. This is what you're being paid for. This is your job. You should challenge these things. And it's not that you're trying to be difficult, but you think actually this question needs to be asked or it needs to be answered. So it's clear in my head about what we're doing, and so that I can answer it, because someone will ask the question if you don't ask it. So let's make sure you know the answer, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does. It's interesting, isn't it? Because self-reflection is probably one of the hardest skills, I think. It's the hardest thing to analyse yourself, and not just to analyse yourself, but then to recognise if you've done things that need to be developed or you need to change. Some people do that skill really well, and some people just don't.
Yeah, I think it's really hard because you can go either way. Depending on your level of confidence, you can really underestimate yourself. Yeah. Or you can overestimate yourself. I was thinking about this last night. I was thinking about things. Sometimes I overestimate myself, and sometimes I think I do, and then I underestimate myself when I get to a situation, and then everything, the incident or the event will happen, and I'll come out and go, actually, no, I was okay with that. I was bob on. I didn't overestimate it. I might have been a bit scared about some of these things, but it's quite interesting.
Confidence is low.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did a clinical leadership program. I worked for the NHS for a few years, and one of the phrases that teachers used on that, and I can't remember who it's attributed to, was the imagination's worse than the event.
Yeah, definitely.
We always work things up more in our heads than it actually happens, and once it happens, it's never quite as bad.
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
That's overthinking, really, isn't it? That's just linking into overthinking, definitely. Do you know, it's interesting you use the word, the words imposter syndrome, because that's exactly what I think every single day. People say to me, "Are you doing a PhD?" And I look around and I'm like, "Who are you talking to?" And then I remember, "Oh yeah, it's me." I still can't believe that sort of thing's happening. It seems to be within a lot of people imposter syndrome, but it doesn't seem very widely spoken about outside of academia.
I think it occurs quite a lot, but people hide it, and sometimes the discussions might be in the pub on a Friday, and people have had a drink about, oh, I don't feel confident doing this, and then you kind of deal with it in different ways with different people. But I think it does happen quite a lot. I think it's certainly in academia, it's and maybe it's the kind of publish or peril kind of attitude that happens across the sector, that people really do feel that, and they overthink things. I mean, publishing is hard. It really is. The process is hard, and the length of time it can take can be hard, and that can take a toll on people, because if you're not getting feedback immediately, and we know this with students, if they're not getting feedback within a certain point, if we look at kind of transition pedagogy, then they're more likely to leave.
Yeah.
Where it's the same with academia. We still have those same things, especially around publishing. But the longer it takes for us to get feedback, that our confidence wanes, because we think, well, why haven't I had feedback? And very often it's because people are busy, and
it's not about you.
Yeah, it's not all about me or all about things, but actually we forget that sometimes, and we sink into overthinking, and I think that happens a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
With colleagues.
Yeah, definitely. I'm still on that first journey of publishing my undergraduate dissertation. A year down the line, and I'm still trying, and I do get that sense of, oh, is it just me? What's wrong with me? Why can't I do it? It's really hard.
No, I think it happens. I mean, I've had things that have taken a short time and things that have taken a long time, and I think the longest was 3 years. So and it wasn't necessarily anybody's fault. There was a change in process. So we'd submitted. There was a struggle to get reviewers, and then they had to change their systems. Well, that put a backlog on everything, and then it just took a long time for things to happen. And it's just one of those things, but it does happen. And you kind of look and go, God, did we really wait 3 years for that? Yes, but actually, it was a good outcome when we look at it.
Yeah, of course. I think my frustration at the beginning was what's wrong with my writing? I think it's okay. Stop telling me it's wrong. And it was like a stubbornness about it. I didn't realise how different you need to write for a journal article than you do, say, for a paper at university. Trying to make that transition's hard. And I think the initial stages for me was just pure stubbornness.
Well, I think there is that element of stubbornness of what's wrong with my writing. I might have passed my degree, I've done these things, and actually you're writing for a different audience, and different journals have different expectations. Sorry. And I think one of the things that is really interesting is that sometimes there's an assumption that if you start to write in a different area and you submit for a journal, that your writing is, I suppose, it's not about the quality, but it might be more naive. It might not be more as informed as you would like it, because you're writing in a new area or you're writing for a new journal. And sometimes the feedback that can come back is brutal, and it can make you laugh quite a lot sometimes. I remember writing with a colleague, and we submitted to a journal that it was in a completely new area, and we were testing to see whether we were in the right field or not. And the feedback that came back from one of the reviewers was absolutely brutal. It was appalling. It should never have been sent out. But basically, we said you should never write anything again. You've clearly never written anything and never been published. Now, I was fairly inexperienced at that point and had 2 or 3 publications, but my colleague had like 80 publications and was very well published. And we sat and laughed, and we howled with laughter. Oh my God, this is how brutal it can be sometimes of people's responses and kind of the egos in there. So we didn't know that, but now we do know that. And do we want to continue working in that area? And I think it is sometimes that people forget. And certainly when we're reviewing, when you're blind reviewing, is you don't know what stage of the journey they're at.
Yeah.
And we're not always at the same point in our journey as our reviewer. So our reviewer might be very well educated and far beyond us in terms of what we're writing, but actually we might be at the beginning of our journey or in the middle. But it is quite interesting. You can see it on Twitter when you get people saying, authors say, I've been told I have to quote myself because I clearly don't understand what I wrote previously. So it's really interesting, but the whole peer review process, and it can be quite brutal. I mean, I think one of the things that I think I found I'm probably still a little bit sensitive about it, and I do find that it knocks my confidence in myself and my writing. Whereas I've got another colleague who's like, it's fine, we'll move on to something else. We'll go somewhere else, and they're much more resilient about it. And I think you do need that level of resilience in there. But yeah,
I know we're going off on a bit of a tangent, starting with the sort of journals and publishing, but I think it's really interesting. I've been reading quite a lot recently around, I guess, is it a bit of a movement where people aren't submitting to journals and aren't publishing? And there's a bit of a shift in academia where they're saying, you know, sometimes it costs you to publish, doesn't it? And that's some of the peer reviews that come back are all around their egos, and whether it's a fair process or whether we should be looking at something else.
I think it's really interesting because there are different ways to do it. I mean, there's some amazing stuff going on around visual dissemination of research kind of through comics. It's a really interesting way to do things and very, very good. You see more scientists going through YouTube or through Twitter. Twitter's, you know, there's some amazing stuff coming out through there. But it's whether it's counted within an institution, and this whole idea of where is your scholarship appreciated and or taken seriously. So in some disciplines, if you were to write about teaching and learning, then that would do you no good in your career in some institutions, because they're research focused and they're not interested in that strand of research. Whereas other institutions, that would be amazing and it would really help with your career. So I think sometimes it's finding the institution that you belong to, or the type of institution that you belong to. So, you know, we talk about kind of the Russell Group or the Red Brick and kind of the research intensives versus the post-92 and kind of the teaching intensive universities. And some people really want to do research and they fit well in a research institution, but actually some people really want to teach, and the best place for them isn't necessarily in a research institution. It might be in a smaller teaching intensive university. But I do think sometimes people just have to find the right place.
Find out where you fit.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I think we've lost people in academia and probably in most professions as well, because you get put off by one workplace and you kind of get burnt out by what goes on. But sometimes it's worth looking around and trying, actually, am I in the right kind of institution? What is my priority? What is it that I really enjoy doing? But I think there's also this thing, and this goes back to the self-reflection and the kind of imposter syndrome. What do I really enjoy, and what am I really good at?
Yeah.
Because sometimes I really enjoy something, but I'm really awful at it.
Yeah.
And the thing that I don't enjoy, I'm really good at. So I think it's sometimes, you know, going, actually, if I'm really good at it, but I don't enjoy it, is that my job? And then I do something else that fulfills that kind of creative, what I really enjoy. So yeah, it's finding the balance that you want in life. And I think it's different for different people.
Yeah, of course it is.
It's messy.
Yeah, messy. And that starts us back with our messy journeys, doesn't it? So let's talk about why I've asked you to talk to me today. And it is all about our educational journey. So sort of how have you ended up in this position talking today, and concentrating around education for you, you know, the highs, the lows, and how it's ended up in this place. So shall we start with your education? How has that been for you, going back to when you were sort of high school age?
High school, it's been messy from the start of it, I suppose. And there's in terms of moving around a lot. So my parents worked in the pub industry and the hotel industry, and I moved around a lot when I was little. So I went to 3 different secondary schools in 3 years, and because we just moved, and it wasn't necessarily their fault, but it was fine. I got along well with everybody. What I find, there are still times now that I find I'm missing things in my education.
Okay.
Because we moved, and it didn't necessarily pick it up in exams either. There was something that might have been taught in one school, say for example in year 8, but it was taught in year 7 in another. And if I joined in year 8, I might have missed it. So you just miss little things. So sometimes, I didn't know that, and I think, why didn't I know that? And I can think back to there's times there that I miss things as well. But again, I think my whole journey has been quite messy as well. So I did fine at GCSEs, you know, kind of okay grades in there, 4Bs, 4Cs, 3Ds as well. And then going into A-levels, they weren't great grades, a CDE. But but I went off to university.
What did you do in your A-levels?
I changed them as well, and this is what I found. So I started off doing French and just found it too much. I was in a group, and actually, if I look back, I should have stuck with it because I would have gotten a decent grade in it. But at the time, again, confidence. I was in a group that had a lot of strong students in there that had come from a school where they had a very strong languages department, and they dominated the class. And actually, that just killed my confidence in speaking French. So I ended up dropping it and picking up music. So I did music, English, and psychology.
Wow.
So yeah, that was kind of where I kind of went in, and then I went off to university and did psychology with international relations.
Why did you choose that?
At the time, I was thinking about going to work for the Foreign Office. My cousin worked for the Foreign Office, and I thought, oh, that sounds like a really interesting career. I wouldn't mind doing working in an embassy, but kind of going down that route, or potentially kind of UN, EU. And then I got to university, and the staffing had changed considerably on the international relations side of the program. So all the things that I'd gone to the university to do, they weren't on the course anymore.
Oh.
So that kind of killed my confidence and enjoyability in that area, really, because it became more politics, and that wasn't really what I wanted to do. So I ended up doing a lot more psychology and looked at kind of health and counselling psychology at the time, and had a great time at university. Met some of my best and greatest friends there. Then I went into a job working in research around vocational education and qualifications. So we were looking at national occupational standards. And we had a running joke because I was looking at the national occupational standards for decommissioning nuclear sites. Wow. And one of my friends worked in shipping, who was shipping nuclear waste around the world. So we had a bit of a joke about that at the time, kind of early 2000s. And it wasn't really the job for me. It wasn't what I was enjoying, but I kind of stuck around, and I wanted to do counselling. And all my friends had moved to London. I thought, well, I'm going to move to London. And there was a counselling job that came up in London. So I moved down to London, went for the counselling job, and all the funding got put on hold.
Oh, no.
So there I was in London with no money coming in and couch surfing and staying with friends. I ended up getting a job at a private language college on Oxford Road, teaching English as a foreign language.
Really?
And that was how I started kind of teaching. And I'd done some teaching at a local college in health and social care while I was at university as well. They got us in to do stuff around psychology and other things around kind of pain management. So my dissertation was on pain management and complementary therapies. And part of that was because I had a car crash in my first year of university and was in quite significant pain, and actually complementary therapies helped. So it was just a different thing at the time. Complementary therapies are not for everybody, but it helped me at the time. So I'm kind of very open to that kind of thing. So jumping back, so this is where it gets messy as well. So I'm jumping around. So I'm jumping back to London, and kind of, I'd got the teaching English as a foreign language job on Oxford Road, which was an incredible experience. I worked with some amazing people. And it was a method called the Callan method, which is a direct method of teaching. It's very, very specific, very routine. The college that I worked at, some very famous people had worked there and that kind of stuff. So it was quite interesting working with those colleagues and stuff. Then whilst I was there, a organization based in China had come over to look for some English teachers, because as they were running up to the Olympics, there was a shortage of language teachers. So they were trying to get people to go over to China to teach English, French, and German at the time, because there was this massive shortage, and they wanted to get local teachers being able to speak the languages for when the tourists arrived. So I was offered the job and went to China. But as I was going to China, the funding came up for the counselling job.
Oh.
So I had this moment of, oh, what do I do? And it was actually, well, China's a kind of felt like a once in a lifetime opportunity. So I went to China.
Amazing.
So I'm
really glad you made that choice. That's what I was thinking in my head. Please say you went to China.
Yeah, I did. And it was really, it was interesting going, because when I spoke to my parents, my dad was like, go, do it. And my mum was the same. She says, yes, you've got to do it. But my dad was like, yeah, of course you're going to go. And because we forget our parents actually have done these things. And my dad had travelled and done things when he was a kid. And he was like, yes, you've got to do it, go. Which was great. I spent I think I was there for 18 months.
Whereabouts in China? Whereabouts?
I was in Guangzhou, which is South China, and it's not far from, I suppose, Hong Kong. It's about half an hour on a plane to Hong Kong. You can drive down through to Shenzhen that way as well. And we worked at South China Normal University, and we were based at the South China Normal University, and then we went out to different towns, and they were all about an hour away. And we would work with English teachers in those towns to make sure that they could speak English. So yes, they were English teachers, but actually had they spoken English to a foreigner at that point? So there was a team of us, and what we'd do is we'd rotate through the towns so that they got used to different accents and speaking speeds. Because very often that they're used to learning American English and they can only understand American, but actually they were going to have all these people from all around the world, so they needed to learn different types of English. So that was really interesting, and I ended up as the manager for the sites and the main centre, which was really, really interesting, working with the team there, working with colleagues at the university as well. I went to a lot of Buddhist temples, which was amazing. I went to several. My students were like, "Oh, we want to take you to the temple." I was like, "Which one?" And they would always say, "Oh, you've never been here," and I'd always been there. It was hilarious, but it had some amazing times, and I had an amazing experience the culture, and I think it's really important.
Yes, of course.
To live there. It was very different to traveling through, because I spent so much time there. I learned a tremendous amount, really.
Well, I think traveling through somewhere, you don't really get a sense of what that place is like. You do have to live there, don't you? And experience that culture up front and personal. How amazing. I could talk to you about China forever, though. I find somewhere I've always wanted to go. Hong Kong in particular.
It's absolutely amazing. I had a phenomenal time there, and different experiences with different people. It was just amazing. It's not for everybody, and that's the thing, but actually it depends on what you're doing and what you're going there for, and what's your point.
So you were there about 18 months, did you say?
Yeah, I was there for about 18 months, and then my grandmother had a heart attack. So I came back to the UK at that point, and it was literally going to be I'm going to be back for 6 weeks and then go back to China. And then when I got back, I realised no, I needed to stay in the UK. But the organisation I worked for had private colleges in the UK, so I ended up carrying on working for them. And I worked for them very briefly in Birmingham, and then I worked for them in Manchester for about 5 years. And during that time, I started to do a master's in cardiac rehab, because my grandmother had a heart attack, and I was looking at the psychology of it all, because at the time there was a massive push towards cardiac rehab and counselling. And as I was doing the master's, all the funding got pulled. So
this has happened to you a lot.
It has happened to me quite a lot. So I withdrew and took the postgraduate certificate, because at the time it was like, there's no point in carrying on with this because there's no jobs. And yes, the skills are going to be interesting, but actually I'm not going to need those. And at the time, there was a real change in policy around teachers and what qualifications they needed in the FE and skills sector. So I had a teaching qualification, but they wanted us to do different teaching qualifications. So then I had to go through that route, and I ended up doing subject teaching qualifications, which were fine. And then they changed the rules again, and then we were allowed to have full PGCEs. So it just changed a lot. So I spent a couple of years kind of doing qualifications in teaching, which was absolutely fine. I enjoyed that. I had a great time with some colleagues. And that was whilst I was still working for the private college. But I'd reached a bit of a ceiling. Certainly in the private sector at the time, you look at the salary, and it was, for what I was doing, it wasn't paid well. But it came a point of actually, what do I want to do? So I took a bit of a sidestep from the private college and management into a teaching role in what was classed as welfare to work at the time. Okay. So working with the job centre and agencies, supporting people for English and numeracy skills and kind of CV writing skills. I spent must be about 8 months doing that. And then I got a job working for the NHS. So my time in China and the start of the PG Cert cardiac rehab was really helpful, because I worked with refugee healthcare professionals, and we were supporting them in their training. So initially English and then clinical skills. So we would take them through the IELTS examination, which was the requirement at the time, and then take them through their associate, depending on what profession they were in, so whether they're a doctor, a nurse, a pharmacist, or other things. They were already qualified, and what we had to do was take them through their requalification here in the UK, because there's a different process for them depending on the national body. So we take them through that process, and I did that for 5 years, which was amazing. It was really, really fantastic work getting people into work, but actually taking them through kind of the language skills and breaking it down, and then bringing it through into their clinical skills and working with the clinicians. And we had an amazing team that did a lot of team teaching between language teachers, clinicians. And what we found is that even though the language teachers weren't clinicians and that wasn't their field, they picked up quite a lot by working with the clinicians, and it worked with the clinicians with the language skills. So when we first started teaching together, we didn't know each other's subjects. But as we taught together, we begin to understand and pick up what was from the other subject. So it did become quite interesting when the doctors would intervene when we were saying things and going, "Do you mean this?" I was like, "Yes, you've got it, yes." So it was really, really interesting how we worked that. But it was fantastic work, and there was a lot of good work going on across the country with that as well. Whilst I was doing that, I did a clinical leadership program, and then after I'd done that, ended up on a secondment working in frontline service in the NHS. So I was, I suppose it was the lead, I think it was the lead manager, but it was probably what a lot of people would call the deputy director role for a unit that had satellite sites across the north of England, and inpatient, outpatient. We had a lot of patients coming through. It was really, 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 really interesting. Probably one of the most stressful jobs I've done ever. My days would regularly start at kind of 7:30 with a phone call to say, "You've got a patient who is supposed to be going into surgery at 8:30, but there's no beds. You've got till 8:15 to find out, otherwise we can't go ahead with surgery." And having a relationship, and there was a lot of movement in that, and it was an amazing experience, but very, very stressful. And I suppose all that, while during that time when I was working with the refugees, I'd also been doing some work with international medical graduates who were coming to work in the UK, and we were looking at how supporting them in going through their exams to work in the UK. So we talked about messy before, and this story's a little bit messy, but it will come back to it in just a moment. So whilst I was working with the refugee healthcare professionals, I'd done an evaluation of our service in a way that no one had ever done before. So an evaluation had first been done, but they'd asked people who were currently in the service what they thought of it. And my view of that was, that's really great, but actually they don't know anything about it. What we need to do an evaluation with people that have gone through the service and are working, because they can give us an honest view of how effective it was.
Yeah, because you see the end then, don't you?
So
currently there, they've not reached the end.
Yeah, so I did kind of a 10-year review and did that review, and that was formed part of my PhD. So that's how I did my PhD, through the evaluation of the service, working with the refugee healthcare professionals, which kind of which goes back to when I was in the secondment, is when I finished my PhD. So I probably, at that point, I was like, is this really what I want to do? And it was a great experience, but it wasn't really what I wanted to do and wanted to carry on with. I wanted to be back in education. And that's when so the routes that I've had as a private college, we worked across FE and HE programs, and in the medical school it was higher education post-qualifying exams. So moving into the university sector was kind of a transition into something slightly different. And I came into the University of Bolton, worked in the off-campus division initially as their academic coordinator for standards enhancement and the learner experience. One of the longest job titles I've ever had.
I was just about to say, that's a tongue twister.
It is.
Say it again, but say it faster.
Academic coordinator for standards enhancement and the learner experience.
It just rolls off the tongue.
Everyone here calls it an AC Selly, and it kind of it's an interesting role, because it kind of makes you think, it's a coordinator, or what does that mean? But actually, it's the academics that are in charge of quality, and that can be quality of teaching and learning. It can be quality in terms of documentation, and there's a lot of things that go in with that as well. So I worked with off-campus, I think it was for 18 months at that point. And then I worked with some amazing people and got to go to some amazing countries because we had partners overseas. And then a colleague was retiring in the education department, teaching on the our PG Cert in Teaching and Learning, which was our staff development program. And because of when so this is messy again. So jumping back to when I did my PGCE, when I was working in the private college and in teaching, I have a thing about placements. Okay. And I think everybody should have this thought of, at some point we were a trainee, and at some point we needed a mentor. Yes. So I've always been keen to provide placements. So after I'd completed my PGCE, because I knew how difficult it was to get a placement and mentors, I'd always mentored and provided work-based placements in teaching all the way through when I worked in the NHS. We always had trainees in, and I was always supporting them. And I'd done a bit of guest lecturing on PGCE programs, as well as teaching in the private college at the university when I was in China. So it kind of felt like it was a really good route. So I came in to the education department, teaching there, working around professional development and the professional recognition framework for higher education academy, the UKPSF, or the professional standards framework for teaching and learning in higher education, which Advanced HE kind of look after for the sector. So I came in and did that, and then I was promoted to associate teaching professor in that role. And as that, I took on, it was an operational lead role, as the title was, as a management role. And then this year I was promoted to head of education. So a lot of the stuff I've been doing is an operational lead role, but actually this is more a fuller role in working in the school. So it's been quite messy and lots of jumping around, I suppose, my journey.
There doesn't seem to be one clear path, and I tell you what sticks out in my mind is how changes have happened that have not been under your control, and it's changed your path.
Yeah.
So for example, the university, you've gone there specifically for these people, and then they've not been there. So your undergraduate degree has changed, and then you want to go and do the counselling, and the funding's pulled, and you've ended up in China. It's all been circumstances, hasn't it, that has changed your path. You've sort of gone one way and your route's gone a different way.
I think, I suppose one of the important things I think I've learned is actually you've got to have a level of resilience, and you'd have to just roll with it.
And adaptability.
The adaptability, or as a colleague, Emily McIntosh, talked about bounce back ability. And it is about how you bounce back. It is about how you're resilient to these changes. I could have decided, oh no, I really don't like this. That the people have all left. I want to go to another university, and it's a what if. Well, if I'd gone somewhere else, I wouldn't have met the people that I met and my friends that I have, and I wouldn't have done the things that I've done. So I don't get too hung up on about that, but I do tend to roll with it and see what happens and what changes.
And take your chances, see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is, a real chance of what you get in. I think one of the things I have found through those is rolling with it and going, okay, so if this isn't the job that I want, or the direction that I want to be, what should I be doing and what should I be looking at? And a colleague many years ago gave really good advice about, what is it you want to do? If you don't know what it is that you want to do, kind of look at somebody's job and go, actually, I quite like the look of your job, and get their job spec, because then that becomes your development plan. Because you look at, well, what have they got and what did they need, or what does the person spec say about that? And you kind of build your experience with those kind of things. And sometimes you find that you meet them much earlier than you thought, but actually sometimes it gives you a really good steer of what to do and where to go.
Yeah, exactly. Do you feel you're the same person now? I feel as if up until now you've been quite, I wouldn't say risk taker. You just take your chances and go with it. Would you say you're still that type of person?
I think I do. I do tend to go with my gut sometimes and think, that level of intuition. Does this feel right? Does this feel wrong? What's going with there? Because I think it is a risk in some state. China was a risk. Yeah. The thing about it,
moving to London was a risk.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing that I kind of leave out about that whole story is that when I was 18, just before I went to university, an opportunity came up for my mum and dad to move to the States, and they did.
Right.
So when I went to university, they weren't there. So it wasn't that I was going home at the weekend and getting my washing done. I had family in the country, but actually it was crack on and get on with it. I had some amazing summers because I got to go to the States and clean schools and that kind of thing. But
how much of an influence did that have on you, though? Because you don't have that opportunity to just go back to mum and dad and kind of DOS. Well, you could have done. You could have just moved to America.
No, but it was this thing of actually get on with it. And I think part of the thing, and I was a little bit harsh probably with my mum at the time. And my dad said you need to speak to your mum because they were going for it and they were all up for it. And then my mum kind of got cold feet. And my dad was like, you need to talk to her because she's like, you're the problem. And I was like, what do you mean I'm the problem? He was like, well, you know, she's
can't leave her baby.
So I think the conversation that I had was get a life. I'm going to university to get mine. It's time for you to get your own life back. And she was really taken aback and she went, you're absolutely right. This is our life. But it was, again, understanding and knowing that, you know, I'm going to university. I'm about to set off and do things for my life. It's not your life. You can't live it for me. No. But it was, and I suppose I was very lucky that I was able to have that very frank conversation of, you know, you're not happy with what you're doing within the pubs. You've been doing it for a very long time. This is an opportunity to do something completely different. You know, and there was talk of me at one point going and living over there and going to college over there or university. And that wasn't what I wanted to do. I was quite happy staying in the UK. So, you know, it changed our relationship in some ways and tested it. But I think probably made it better.
Yeah.
It's over time.
I wonder if that's helped frame how you have taken your chances.
Yeah, quite possibly.
If they hadn't have made that choice, you know, at 18, that's a big choice for them to do, isn't it? It's the right choice, but
absolutely.
You don't have that safety blanket just down the road.
No, not at all. And it's really interesting because I'm a bit, I wouldn't say that I'm an introvert is what I am. Though a lot of people would dispute that because I'm quite outgoing at times as well, but you flip between these. But my natural position is I'm an introvert and I tend to sit back and watch things. So I go to a conference or a party or anything like that, I tend to watch what's going on first and get a sense for things before I throw myself in, where other people will just throw themselves in.
That would be me.
Yeah.
I'd be the one you'll be watching going, what is she doing?
I've lost the thread of what I was talking about there. So it's kind of this attitude of how you go with things and just think about, well, sometimes you just can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
So I think there is this sense of, well, it's changed and it's not what you expected. Well, you can sit and really ponder on that and get caught up to it, or you deal with it and move on. I suppose, and I think this is, you know, kind of linking into the pandemic now. It's, you know, people talk about we've lost a year of our lives. Yeah, we've all lost a year of our lives, everybody. And it's been harsher for some people. There's absolutely been harsher for some people. There's no doubt about that. But we've all lost a year of our lives. What are we going to do about it? We can't go back, but there's nothing we can do about that. So we've kind of got to roll with it and deal with that. But that's kind of been my attitude through life. And I probably get that from my grandmother, bless her, who that was her attitude, crack on. And that's what she used to tell us as a kid. So it was, you know, I think we're really shaped by our parents and grandparents and a lot of these things. And I think if you've got certainly grandparents that kind of lived through war or those kind of things and where they had to be resilient, it's just they just very much get on with it. Well, it's not what you expected. So what are you going to do next? Are you going to crumble or are you going to get up and move on? And it was always, that's kind of the get up and get on with it. That's very much kind of with my family.
Taking that personal responsibility, isn't it? It's not everybody else's fault. This is what you're faced with. You've got to deal with it and move on.
And that's hard. And I think, did you ever watch The West Wing?
No.
Fantastic series. You really should watch it. But there's a scene in there, and they talk about this, about not everyone can pull themselves up by the bootstraps. Some people can. Some people can't. So we're not all the same, and we need to figure out how we can help people that can't that aren't as resilient and can't do those things. But actually, at some point, we do have to take a level of personal responsibility of what can I do to make this change.
How do you teach that to people?
it's difficult because very often we're taught it as we're kids, aren't we?
Well, we are. I've had a very interesting conversation recently with somebody, something like this. Do you think it's generational? Because I've got a 13-year-old son who thinks everything's handed to them on a plate. And I just think it's completely different compared to when I was 13. I grew up in the 80s.
I think the thing is that the difficulty we have is the world's changed. And we have a memory of it being different, and they don't have a memory of it being anything other than what it is. So that there's a challenge there, I think, without going into too deep a conversation.
A huge challenge. They couldn't even figure out how to make toast last night. Let's not go there. It's infuriating. I used to have to do all kinds at his age, and I don't know whether that's my responsibility, whether it's because of me, or whether it is society in a general difference in generation. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I suppose there's this idea of what do we see on TV and hear on the radio of what's normal and what's not normal, and I think it's about preparing ourselves as much as possible.
It's not even TV anymore. It's YouTube and TikTok. He doesn't know what the TV is.
But I suppose this is the messy journey that we're all through, though, isn't it? It's people think that, you know, so I'm going to do my GCSEs, I'm going to do my A-levels, I'm going to go to university, I'm going to get a job, and then I'm going to get married and do these things. You know, or I'm going to go to university, I'm going to do my degree, I'm going to do a PhD, and then I'm going to work in academia. That isn't the case for everybody. There's a lot of people that get to do a PhD and they think, God, I hate this. I really love research, but I don't want to work in university. I want to go work in industry. You know what? There's nothing wrong with that. And then you get people that have worked in practice that go, actually, I don't want to work in practice. I want to work in university and feed back and do those kind of things. So I think, you know, this all goes back to this idea of reflection, isn't it? And thinking about yourself and what is best for you, but reflecting on your personal responsibility of what is it that I can do. I mean, I was reading something, it was a while back, and it was probably on Facebook or something like that. And it was talking about someone saying that they were too old to go do a degree. They were 35. I'll be 40 by the time I finished it. And this person said, well, you're going to be 40 anyway, so why don't you be 40 and have the degree?
Exactly. And
it's this thing of, well, it's hard. Well, yes, it is hard. But it's worth it generally. I mean, sometimes it shouldn't always be hard. You know, sometimes things don't have to be as hard as we make them out to be, because I think sometimes we do make it harder for ourselves. We put the pressure on ourselves and those kind of things. But after we have to take responsibility for that as well, about how hard we make it for ourselves when we have made the bar so high. When other people are telling us, actually, you don't need to do that. You know, be kind to yourself. And I think that's an important thing as well, about being kind to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think kindness is what needs to be in every walk of life.
Yeah,
not very kind.
Yeah, no, and I think it's probably really important right now as well, because I think everyone's feeling so raw, especially after the lockdowns. And I think probably in kind of Bolton and the Northwest, we've been under lockdown a lot. We've had a lot of restrictions. I think people are really kind of chafing at that, but actually we do have to take a level of personal responsibility for what we do and be sensible about some things as well. But that goes into everything in life, isn't it? It's about being sensible for your choices. I think there's things about taking risks, but actually, if everyone's saying that's not the right risk to take, but you do it anyway, and then say, well, but nobody told me.
Actually we did. No, completely. I agree with that. I think we do have to be kind, and there's not enough kindness around, especially you've mentioned coronavirus quite a lot, and people forget that it has happened to every single one of us. And our stories might be different, but they're not any worse or any better. They're just different. And we've all potentially suffered. And I know there's some people perhaps have had different things happen to them, but then how do you quantify that? How do you quantify what's worse? I know you can, if someone's lost the job and lost the house, but I think majority of us, we've all suffered in some way. And I get tired of people trying to compete with levels of mine's worse than yours.
Absolutely. I think that's a difficult thing. I suppose, again, on social media, this is something else I don't know who it's attributed to, but this idea that we're all in the same boat. We're not actually all in the same boat. We're all in the same storm. We're in slightly different boats that are made out of slightly different materials. And some people are in paper boats and some people are in nice luxurious yachts. So it's these kind of things that you look at and go, actually, yes, everybody has suffered. Everybody has had to lock down, and their lives have been limited in lots of different ways. And that's impacted very, very differently. It's about our perceptions just taking stock, isn't it? And going, actually, do I need to be in a competition with someone else about their suffering? And I think sometimes we get caught up in that. And actually, they've had a bad time, I've had a bad time. It doesn't matter whose is worse. Let's be nice, and let's be a little bit kind and compassionate, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah.
Take that extra second to just stop and say, are you okay?
Yeah.
Don't make it about you. Just ask them if they're okay and then move on.
Yeah. Are you okay? And I suppose sometimes what happens is people get very frustrated is you ask the question, are you okay? But then nobody asks the question back.
Yes.
So you see that as well. And that's always an interesting thing. And I think that's about being mindful and being reflective of what is my part in this conversation? Am I just a listener and I'm absorbing all these things? And sometimes that's what happens. But actually, sometimes you need to be able to sound off and speak to people as well. And we've had that conversation here. We've got lots of students that have been in distress. and they've talked to our staff, and then we've supported our staff. But then it's a question of, well, so who supports the managers? And you get into this thing of, okay, so we need to make sure that we've got a loop where everybody is looked after and not one person is taking the brunt of, the abuse or the problem or any of those kind of things. It's very, very difficult. But sometimes also we have to recognize when people are, I've had this conversation with people about how people communicate when they're stressed. This is, this term has been used a lot, unprecedented times. It has been unprecedented times. And I think sometimes we just have to remember when someone is bordering on the abusive, the question is, what's going on?
Yeah, exactly.
Why, not to react in a way, but it's actually figuring out, okay, so what's going on here? Because there is something going on here. And it could be that you're really isolated, no one's been in contact, or something else has happened, or you're living in an environment where your next door neighbors are really suffering as well, but they're being really loud about it, or that all of a sudden there's a dog next door that's barking all the time because they're not used to people being around all the time. So the stress levels go through. So there's lots of things, and sometimes it takes a lot of unpicking. But
that goes back to, it's not about you. They might be reacting that way. Stop making it about you and ask them, why are you behaving like that? And you might find some very interesting information out.
But I think also what happens sometimes is you realize that it's not about you, in that we've just talked about it. So they're not angry with you, they're just angry at the world, and you're the person that they've communicated their anger with, and it's not about you. They're not angry at you.
They might not even know why they're angry.
Exactly, that happens. Yeah,
it happens with me quite a lot. Usually it's because I've not got chocolate in my hand. Probably why I'm really angry. Or my son's eating it.
Yeah.
So I asked you the question about, do you still think that you're the same type of risk taker now, or do you think it's changed over the years?
I think it's probably changed, and I think I'm probably more considered about some things, and partly that's because of responsibilities that I have. When I was 21, I was renting a house, renting a room in a house. So me going to China made no difference because it was 3 months' notice. Thank you very much. That's the way it is. Whereas now I've got a house and a mortgage and those kind of things. We can't quite do it because you've got to think about how you're going to pay those things. And yes, there's always the handy credit card, but actually that you've got a debt to pay of that at some point. So I think I would still take risks in some respects, but I think actually we're more considered about the risks that we would take in planning before those. I have a friend that quit their job and set up their own business. And when I was sitting with them and talking about them, I felt that the risk was massive, and it wouldn't be something that I would do. It would need more planning from my part, and I'd be like, I'd do it in 12 months if I did these things, but I couldn't do it straight away. Whereas they were much happier to just go, let's try it. Doesn't matter. You've got no response, no other commitments kind of thing. You don't have a house. And actually, they've done really well for themselves, and they now do have a house and a mortgage. So now they're more cautious. But it's interesting how time and experience changes your inner self in some things. I think as well, and I think it's really interesting when you say, "Are you the same person?" No, because I think when you go through your qualifications and your training in education, you change. We very often talk about kind of threshold concepts and going, through a portal. Once you've gone through a portal of knowledge and knowing something, you can't really go back. And I think that does happen, certainly with self-reflection on what you're doing. That once you've worked in certain situations, certainly within the health service, where you're with people that are it's about life and death, it changes your outlook on things when you're supporting people in that way. And so you will react differently. Sometimes, you can be cushioned from it and you've got a really good support service, but it will change. I think education changes anyway. Every time we learn things, I think it's what's going to happen. Things are going to change. It's how you bring people along on your journey with you.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes that happens as well. People go on an educational journey, whether it's with a partner or with a family, and you end up not on the same journey.
Behind.
And you get and sometimes you're on a journey and you grow in different ways. It's just very different. I think sometimes people get very angry about that change, but actually it's happened.
Yeah,
it's a journey.
You care about that person. You let that happen, don't you? You don't try and pull them back.
Yeah, but you kind of sometimes the anger's at yourself, isn't it, for letting it happen as well. So it can happen in both ways, and yeah, it's very, very different, I think.
Yeah, it is. It's really interesting listening to you whilst you were talking. Then I was thinking about my life. So for 16 years I was in the police, and I was very black and white, and very methodical and very organised. I mean, when I got married and I went to my hen party, it was laminated, my instructions. I was that organised. Whereas now, going through this education, going through a bit of life experience, I don't never consider laminating anything, and I very much a risk taker, and very much kind of all my mindset's changed. And then thinking about the people around me too, I've had so many people say to me, "Oh, you've changed. You're just so different." And I think it is because I have changed and I have grown, and education has brought a different concept to my life, and the world's colourful, whereas it was black and white before.
Absolutely, and I think people do change and they do have to react. I mean, I have I think about a very good friend of mine who I think still is, but certainly was when we were younger, was all about cleanliness and had a bit of an OCD about things being clean, and always had a package of Dettol wipes in the bag. And that was a running joke. If you got your Dettol wipes, you're going to wash that, you know. And then had children, and we were like, they're going to have a meltdown. Total meltdown. And for the first couple of months, the Dettol wipes were still there, and then they were like, do you know what? No, out the door. And it's quite interesting because we had a period where that just went out the door because they recognised my children are too young and they don't care, so I'm just going to have to put this back. But now that their children are in their teens, the Dettol wipes have come back out again, which is hilarious. They've got back to their roots. But so I think we do phase in and out of things within our journeys of what we think and what we do. But I think you know, there's nothing wrong with a journey being messy, and I think there's nothing wrong with it being not coordinated or going to plan, because sometimes things, you know, they go the right way. You know, sometimes our plan isn't the right plan, and other people see that and they pull us along on the right journey and give us advice. And sometimes we don't always appreciate that advice and guidance at the time, because it's like, that's not my plan, and they're giving really good advice of saying that's not going to work. And I think certainly in education now, I think things are changing so rapidly in the world that actually we just have to be, you know, flexible with everything and learn to be flexible, like we said, resilient, to roll with the changes, which isn't always, you know, it doesn't always feel great at the time. And I think sometimes we get hung up on that certificate or that achievement. And certainly, you know, the time around that we're doing this, you know, exam results, people get so hung up on your GCSE results or your A-level results, or what category you got for your classification you get for your degree. At some point, no one cares what classification you got for your degree or what you got for your GCSEs. It's a moment in our lives that is really, really important. But actually, when you get beyond that and for a couple of years, you think, actually, why was I so worried about that? I'm doing okay. I've got my job. I'm doing these things. I've met these people. I've traveled. I've done whatever it is. So yeah, you know, yes, we want to be everybody wants to be successful. But what is your measure of success? Is it that you're happy, or is it that you've got that, you know, really stressful job in the city making, you know, you millions, but actually you're not very happy? So I think find what's best for you and within that as well, I think.
Couldn't agree more. It's interesting you said that. I actually put a post on social media yesterday because I've been seeing all week, you know, proud parents and proud people saying about how little Johnny's got 17 A stars or whatever the grades are these days. And I put something on there to say, well done, I'm really pleased for people and congratulate you, it's been a tough time. But actually, what about the people who didn't necessarily get the grades, and what about their journeys? And life is a journey, and just because you didn't get the grade or the result right now doesn't mean you can't be at 42 doing a PhD, because I didn't get the grades. And, you know, your stepping stones across the river might be different, but you'll still get to the other side.
Absolutely. I think, you know, I've seen it with a lot of students that we've had in the past that have, and you kind of alluded this to this before, about they don't necessarily do well at school, or school doesn't serve them well. It's not the right learning environment, and actually they learn better when they're a little bit older.
Yeah, when you're more engaged in that subject.
Well, sometimes as well, it's about levels of maturity and what the family background. If you're not getting support at home for education, you're not necessarily going to do well at 14, 15 in some subjects. But actually, when you get out to work and then you start doing it for fun and you really enjoy reading a book or doing maths or whatever it's going to be, then you start to enjoy it. And we're very fortunate kind of in this country that people can come to university later, you know, as mature students and are really engaged. And that's, you know, the successes that we see from that are really great.
Yeah, they definitely are. I think you can achieve anything at any time if you really want to. And that's the key again, isn't it? If you really want to, if you are resilient, you are willing to change, because it's a hard journey. It isn't easy just going to university and doing a degree. You do have to have that element of interest, and you want to interact, and you have to put the effort in. If you're not willing to do it, then it's not going to work. No. But you can do it. So what's been the most Beneficial part that's ever happened to you on your journey, what would you say has been the key?
That's a really difficult question because I'm not quite sure what has been the key. I think the key is probably about being resilient, and that is in there. The resilience.
Yeah.
Um,
It's been so varied for you, really, hasn't it? It's
has.
been really varied.
I think the thing about the resilience it is, and we talked about this, and that kind of I have resilience in some areas of my life and resilience in not. When we talked about kind of the writing, where I'm less resilient, I suppose I find that really knocks my confidence. Whereas some rejections in life, it's not wasn't meant to be, and I think sometimes that approach probably gets me through quite a lot of things. There are some people that were like, "Oh no, we've got to be logical about this," and that's that if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It wasn't. It kind of. I tend to take it's not meant right now. It might happen in the future, but it's not the right path for me. And sometimes, it's about figuring out where things are and what we're doing, and be resilient. So if you don't get it, yes, we can be upset, but actually you've got to give yourself a time limit for how long you can be upset for, and then pick yourself up and go, okay, so yes, I'm going to have a bad day, and I'm going to feel really sorry for myself, and I'm going to do, go buy myself a thing or whatever it's going to be. I think we all have that habit of, oh, well, I've done well, so I give myself a reward, or I've had a really bad time, so I deserve something. But it's actually going, okay, so now that I've done that, move on. What's next? I think it is. It's what's next.
What's next for you?
What's next? And I really don't know what's next. It's kind of, let's see what happens, what goes from it. I've had a very fortunate journey, given that, my family, I think I'm the first, was I the first in my kind of my mother's side, that side of the family to go to university, going through and do a PhD. It's been an incredible journey, but, also the fact that to become a national teaching fellow as well, none of this was on my radar to do these kind of things. And I never set out to do a national teaching fellow. I was doing my job and going beyond and doing my job and doing things that really had an impact. But at the time, I didn't think that. And at the time, I didn't think I was being creative. I was helping people. And it was just sometimes just doing what we're doing, we're making a massive difference. And we have to take a step back sometimes and just reflect and look at what is it that I'm doing? Am I doing the things that I want to do? Or am I not? And do I want to make a change? And I think part of it, going back to this resilience, is part of it is taking that step back and reflecting and going, is this what I want? And if it's not, what am I going to do to change it?
Yeah.
So
what part of it is my responsibility and what can I do?
Yeah. And if I can't change it, what else do I need in my life to make it a bit more enjoyable?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I feel like that's a really good place to end. So when's it going to be Professor Duncan Cross?
Oh, I have no idea.
I feel like it's not far away.
Oh, I think it's probably further away than
I hope not. Right, I'm just going to press stop on the recording. Thank you so much for talking to me. Just 1 second.